almost becomes repetitive. When Dan Henning came to us as a player, he was an outstanding, he had excellent athletic skills. He was an outstanding baseball player as well as a football player. And he was always a very intelligent, perceptive, poised individual. And he was able to put together all of the things you'd look for in a quarterback. Good passing skill. He was able to move well enough to get the ball upfield if he had to carry it himself. He had some very fine running backs with him. And I think that he was also an honor student, and so he brought all of that. Again, the same, it almost sounds repetitive, but that I was in a mix of bright, intelligent kids, dedicated. His father was the chief of detectives in New York City. So we were getting, at that time, another youngster who was coming to us with all of the great qualities from that home. An interesting factor is that his brother Mike Henning was our manager. And Mike was an outstanding manager and later had great success as a CEO. And so that, as I say, I was learning from them as much as they were, I think, learning from us. One of the things I think we brought to them is that we believed in the youngsters working 2 sports or working all year, that there was something to be gained by competing throughout the year.
Cross-training.
That's right, and there was a great feeling for each other, because by working throughout the year, you get to know the people, you get to know the families. There was all of that kind of just good relationships with each other. And they were in a school that was fostering it. The prep was pushing the kids to be the best they could be in everything. So they had the inside support of the very strong lay people and Franciscan brothers who were the leaders of them. And all of that in the school, then with the immigrant mentalities of following the way you should be living your life, and then them mixing all that together, and then us trying to further it along through our sports. I think that blends for success. It just, and Lombardi was the same type of individual.
And Coach, following along those tracks, I'd like to talk about 2 of our former players that have had incredible entrepreneurial success, incredible success in their business careers, but yet they weren't the caliber of football player of a Danny Henning, a Ray Rakowski, a Richie Zorro. Tell me about Walter Ribonak, who went to Notre Dame, and Peter Callahan.
Peter Callahan was an outstanding defensive player for us. He actually had all-around sports skills, but we used his particular defensive skills. And he was they were tough competitors. All of that mix that was coming to us, and working hard and coming out of working class families, all of that was transcending everything they were doing, and they brought it to the football field. They looked you in the eye. They were kids coming from activities in the CYO programs throughout our parishes, and all of that type of dedication within their communities, within their CYO and PAL activities, was coming to us as coaches. They also brought with them now the dedication, the wholesomeness, the sacrifice, the excellent qualities of character that comes out of that particular background. And we benefited from that. And again, the blending, if you keep blending all that type of thing, and that was just naturally coming about to us. We would not, I don't think, doing anything particularly special except working it hard. And you mentioned our other young man. One was Callahan, and I think the other young man that you mentioned was Walter. Now Walter was about 5'8", and I think he might have been cheating there for an inch. But Walter, I think he was the world's smallest center we had, but he was a great young man and worked very, very hard. And at the end of his 4 years, he wanted to go to the University of Notre Dame. And he went out to Notre Dame under very, very modest circumstances, and became a very excellent student at Notre Dame. Also, an interesting factor is that he lived in the stadium. That was where he needed to to get by at Notre Dame. Economically, he came from very, very modest circumstances. And he lived there and worked very hard. At the end of the 4 years at Notre Dame, he went on to the law school. And after law school, he went out into the business community and had, again, excellent success. And if you met Walter, you would find that he communicates a great human spirit to him. So I could see if he was talking to people in business how you could appreciate him right away as someone that's very wholesome, one that's very straight and forward about things. And I think that those characteristics, which he also exhibited in football as a center, he was a very tough competitor, carried over to his training at Notre Dame and then later on his present success as well in the business community.
Coach, I'm going to talk a little now about the 1960s. We won 3 championships in the 1960s, 1964, 66, and 68. And the 66 team is arguably the greatest team in the history of the Catholic High School Football League, perhaps in New York City football. You would coach 2 Walter Camp All-Americans, Larry Donato and Frank Palmerico, who would be All-American guards at Notre Dame on national championship teams for Ara Parsegian and Dan Devine. You would also coach Ed Jenkins, who would go on to star at the College of the Holy Cross, be drafted by the Miami Dolphins and actually earn a Super Bowl on the 1973 Dolphins championship team. He would be your first player to become a Super Bowl winning player, as the Donatos and Frank Palmerico would become your first Walter Camp All-Americans. And also on that team we had Paul Houlihan, who would become an All-ACC guard at North Carolina, become the athletic director at Vanderbilt University, and is now currently the president of the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans, and all the things he had to deal with down with Katrina. This team, 1966, scored 331 points in 8 games. Since St. Anthony's has broken that record, but it took them 12 games to break it by 4 points. And clearly every coach raves about that 66 St. Francis team. You know, also at this time, Senator Robert Kennedy would come to Brooklyn to recruit Richie Zorro on behalf of Harvard University. And Richie was an incredible athlete, a Polish immigrant, couldn't speak English initially when he came to this country, spoke 3 languages, Russian, Polish as well as American, had a great career in the pros as a kicker at Harvard. And, you know, the era is changing. You know, the 60s, the society changed, and we're talking about values and the St. Francis tradition. The success of all these men as football players, you know, so the next generation of St. Francis leaders. What can you tell us kind of about a Paul Houlihan or the All-Americans at Notre Dame, you know, Ed Jenkins, you know, just your contact with them 20, 30 years after they played for you?
Let's say Jerry Donato and Frank Palmerico. Both of them came from Howard Beach. Both their fathers were policemen. And of course, beside Jerry Donato, we had Larry Donato. Larry and Frank Palmerico were the 2 prime guards out there, and then his brother came along, also an outstanding player, and went on to coach at a number of top colleges, including LSU. But let's stay with the first 2, Palmerico and Larry Donato. Again, it's interesting, they were about the same size, about 6'1", maybe around 240 in college. But in high school, they probably went around 230. So physically, they were somewhat similar, and they came from policemen's families. They came from Howard Beach. They had the great qualities of character that came from the Italian immigrant families. And again, I think, were the recipients of these men come to St. Francis Prep, and they brought with them a tremendous work ethic, absolutely an outstanding work ethic. In fact, I often remember Paul Houlihan would only want to line up with Larry Donato when we would do a one-on-one drill. They wanted to make sure
The best against the best.
That's what they felt. They just felt they had to go against each other. And Palmerico, I mean, to see the work ethic and see what comes out of that work ethic with kids that were coming from that background, and coming to us, and we had some excellent coaches